to our webinar. I am Stacey Cram. I'm the Policy Director at NAMATI, and I'm very pleased to be facilitating today's webinar, which is the first in our March Sustainable Development Goal webinar series. We have come together today for an overview of the status of gender discrimination in nationality laws worldwide, the human rights implications, relevant international laws, linkages with the Sustainable Development Goals, and ways to support reform efforts. Catherine Harrington and Deepti Gurung will be presenting today, and we may have Stephanie Navidi joining us. And I have my network team colleagues Tobias Eigen and Ashley Van Wade, who will field your questions. So it looks like we're ready to get started. Many of you are not already members of the Global Legal Empowerment Network, who is hosting this webinar today, and this may be the first time you're learning about us. So the network is a growing community where more than 900 organizations and almost 4,000 individuals from around the world who are working to advance justice, be it in citizenship rights, land rights, the right to health or education, or any other sector where injustice persists. From across all regions and disciplines, we come together to collaborate and learn from each other, both online and through in-person events. How do we do this? Well, the main way is through an online discussion platform, which you can access from your laptop, tablet, or smartphone. And here we discuss problems, we share ideas, solutions, and opportunities. We also learn from each other through webinars like this one and the other two in our March series. And we have face-to-face learning exchanges, there's a leadership course, and many other events. And we announce all of these on our discussion platform. We also have an online library which has more than 1,000 free legal empowerment resources, training materials, monitoring and evaluation tools, case management forums, academic research, and much, much more. And last but not least, we engage in advocacy together and campaign on issues that affect us globally and nationally. You can join the network by clicking this link on your screen that you're seeing right now, or we'll be getting in touch with everyone after the event to give you an invite to join. So now I am pleased to introduce Catherine Harrington, who is the campaign manager from Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights. She's going to be giving the first presentation, and if Stephanie joins, she can let us know and she can come in. Otherwise, Catherine will be talking to Stephanie's slides. If Stephanie does join, she's the president of Questions to Femme. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Deepti Gurung, who is the mother of 2 stateless daughters and the wife of a stateless man who was unable to secure his nationality documents after his Nepalese father died. We're really glad to have you all join. Each presenter is going to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes, and at the end there should be about 30 minutes for Q&A. Depending on time, we can also give floor to participants. So Catherine, I'm going to hand over to you now to get started on your slides.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much to NAMATI for organizing this conversation. And so pleased to be having this opportunity to talk with all of you about the impact of gender discrimination in nationality laws and the work that the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights and others are doing to support reform efforts. And again, happy International Women's Day. It's a great day to be having this conversation. So just really quickly, the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights was launched in 2014. And of course, reform efforts to secure gender equal nationality rights have been going on in countries across the world for decades and really over a century. But the Global Campaign was started in 2014 to try to align efforts and work across countries and across regions, specifically on this one issue, to try and support efforts so that there are no gender discrimination in nationality laws in any country around the world. So the founding steering committee members, which you'll see here, Women's Refugee Commission, where I'm based, the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Equal Rights Trust, and Equality Now, if you go to the next slide. And the mission of the global campaign is to support reform efforts to eradicate gender discrimination and nationality laws so that women and men have the equal right to acquire, change, and retain their nationality and to pass their nationality on an equal basis to their children and spouses. So I think it's important to note that gender discrimination in nationality laws traditionally existed basically in all countries across the world. This is not something that has its roots in any particular country, region, or religion. In fact, most of the countries that maintain gender discriminatory provisions in their laws today, this is overwhelmingly a legacy of colonial rule, because this type of discrimination in the law existed in the UK, it existed in France, it existed in Belgium, it existed in the United States. And so over the course of the 20th century, most countries enacted reforms recognizing that not only did women deserve equal rights, but that it was in countries' best interest to ensure that their citizens' families had equal access to nationality, that really it's in the country's interest. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And so today there are 26 countries that remain where mothers do not have the equal right to pass their nationality to their children. And when people hear about this, this is oftentimes shocking. And even people sometimes that are working in the human rights sector, this is not something that people are always aware of in terms of this form of discrimination that exists in the law. And people are like, well, why would this be like that? But if you think about it, and you think about the fact that women in many countries have only recently acquired the right to vote. It was only in the United States later into the 20th century that women acquired the right to vote. That the idea that legal identity derived from the father, derived from the spouse when you got married, is in line with discrimination that existed across the board. Today, there are over 50 countries that maintain some form of gender discrimination in their law. So outside of those 26 countries that I just mentioned, these 50 countries have other discriminatory provisions. So mothers can equally pass to their children in these countries, but in the vast majority of these countries, women don't have the equal right to confer nationality on their spouses, and they don't have the equal right sometimes to retain their own nationality. For example, if they marry a foreigner, there might not be equal ability for them to retain their nationality that you would find with a male citizen if he married a foreign woman. Now, the way that the discrimination exists in the law, as I just referenced, it has different ways that it can play out. And the ability to confer to children, in some countries, the provisions are different whether or not the child's born inside or outside the country. A woman's marital status it can impact her ability to retain her nationality, to confer her nationality to her children. And in some countries, there are exceptions. For example, if the father is stateless or unknown, where the mother should, in theory, at least be able to confer her nationality to her children. However, even where these exceptions are in place in the law, in many contexts, it's actually rare that they're put into practice because of discrimination by authorities. And so while, if you look at the laws and you look at these exceptions, that's better than nothing. What we're really advocating for is that citizens, regardless of their gender, should have the equal ability to retain their own nationality, to confer their nationality to their children and their spouses. So gender discrimination in nationality laws is a clear violation of a number of international legal conventions that the overwhelming majority of countries have ratified. It's in contradiction to the mandate for the right to nationality found in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's contrary to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It's in violation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which I'll get to in a second, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Stateless Conventions. The CEDAW has a specific article that mandates that state parties ensure that women and men have the equal ability to acquire, change, and retain their nationality, and also to confer their nationality on children. And the CEDAW committee has further clarified in their general recommendation that this mandate also equally applies to women and men's ability to confer nationality on spouses as well. these laws, outside of being in violation of international law, which is, an important thing to talk about, what is the real world impact on individuals' lives? Now, I don't want to get into this in too much detail because it's so wonderful that we have Deepti on the line today to talk about the impact of these laws on herself and her family. But just to give a quick overview, there are, human rights abuses, violations of children's rights, compromised education, economic implications, implications for access to healthcare, and national insecurity. In terms of the human rights violations, gender discrimination in nationality laws is one of the leading causes of statelessness worldwide. That's why United Nations, UNHCR, has played a really active role in helping to advocate for the reform of these laws, because they have the mandate for stateless persons. And under their 10-year global action plan to end statelessness, action number 3 is eliminating gender discrimination in nationality laws. These laws, contrary to the thoughts of those who were creating these laws to begin with, they had an idea that by having nationality be derived just from the father, just from the spouse, that this was in theory supposed to provide for family unity, when in fact, when we look at the impact of the laws today, they oftentimes separate families. There are perverse incentives in some of these laws. So if the woman is single, she might have the ability to confer nationality to her children, which can encourage couples, despite the fact that they want to be together, to get a divorce in some countries so that the children can acquire the woman's nationality. When women can't confer nationality to spouses, this can oftentimes make it difficult for fathers and husbands to remain with the family in the country because they can't get access to formal employment, sometimes can't get residency permits. There are also implications for human trafficking. We know that stateless persons are at an increased risk of a number of different types of gender-based violence, including human trafficking. Deepti will talk about this more, but there's significant compromised access to education for affected children and adults in terms of accessing higher education, lack of access to national health care services, along with increased risk to human trafficking. There have been links with child marriage, where some families see early marriage as a route to securing the rights that come with citizenship for those children that have been unable to acquire citizenship. And there's also, significant social alienation and psychological damage that can come from this. It creates an incredible amount of stress and hardship for families that are affected. So again, a range of economic costs, impacts on national security, because these laws create marginalized populations with the country that don't have equal access to resources, don't have equal access to formal employment, and that can really create tension and despair sometimes amongst those populations that are affected. In terms of, I know this month Namati is going to have a series of conversations about the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is something that we emphasize in our conversations with governments, when not everyone, sadly, is as compelled by the human rights implications of these laws. But if you want to take a really hard, pragmatic approach, 9 out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are negatively impacted by gender discrimination and nationality laws. And so governments really will not be able to realize their Sustainable Development Goals and support, economic development. These laws have an impact on GDP. They have an impact on individuals' ability to contribute to their countries. So on that note, I think it would be really interesting for Deepti to be able to share a little bit more concretely about how these impact families, and then I can talk a little bit more about some of the work that's being done to try and support reform efforts. So thanks so much.
Hello, my name is Deepti Gurung. I'm a Nepali citizen because my parents and forefathers were always Nepali. And one of the biggest things that I've cherished all my life, because I had my elder daughter when I was 18 years old myself, and now I'm 43 years old myself. So during all this period of time, you can say in a way, almost all my life, it was such a pleasure raising my 2 daughters together. And at the moment, it pains me because they are just not my daughters, but also that they are labeled as stateless. For the reason is, me as a woman in my country, I still cannot freely confer my citizenship to my children. So that is one thing that is really affecting my family, my entire life, or the pattern of my entire world is actually very, very affected. Now please meet my elder daughter. This is my elder daughter. She is my elder daughter, and she is studying law at the moment. Before she pursued her law career or education, she wanted to be a medical doctor, but then she was very sadly, very unjustly, she was denied of sitting for entrance exam even. But the reason is because since she doesn't have citizenship, and for that she had to produce a father's legal documentation. So that was what barred her from sitting for her entrance. Not her qualification, not her ability, but a piece of paper was much more important for her to qualify for the entrance exam even. This is what, like, as a mother, I'm going through and I'm facing each and every day with my elder daughter. And then next is my younger daughter. She is my beautiful little daughter, and as you can see on the slide, like, she's always smiling, and she's a pretty young teenager. But again, she also had to face a hurdle during her education, like during her school days. And when she was about to submit her form, she was stopped from doing that because she again does not have birth registration certificate at all. So I was, at the last minute, I was compelled to go to the Supreme Court and file a case and get a stay order, and then rush that stay order up to the district education office, and then only her form was accepted. And finally, she was able to give at least her examination. But that did affect her a lot. Though she was able to give her examination, that affected her very badly, and psychologically she was in a very teenage age where she would be dreaming of, like, what to do next and what she would plan to do in her future and with her education and with her life. But what happened is because all these kind of things are affecting her every day, she has started seeing herself different from her other friends of her classroom. After her 10th grade, she was also admitted. Her admission name and admission for A-level was out, and it was very confusing for her whether she should go for it or not, because here in Nepal, to join A-level also means that going abroad for higher studies. And to tell you the truth, she has always been a wonderful, beautiful, and a very intelligent child since her young age. That also affected her to take a different decision. Rather than going for A-levels, she went for the +2 program in a public school. So this all is another painful part that I'm facing every day with my children. So this is just an introduction about my family. This is my husband. He is a social studies teacher. He's 43 years old. In his school, he normally teaches students how to be a good citizen for the country, and how a person should lead a life as a good citizen. So this is my husband. And the next slide shows you the family of my brother-in-law, his wife, and his little cute boy over there, Noah. Yes, my husband and his brother, they ended up being stateless because their biological father, he died when my husband and his brother was very, very young. So because a young mother taking care of 2 sons, and the elder son is also a victim of polio, or let's say survivor. So what happened is, she had to move on with her life, and she wanted to, like, as every normal people would do, they would want to get over with their dark, difficult times, and they want to get back to their normal and better life again. In that course, she remarried another gentleman again from Nepal. But then once the kids grew up, and then, like, since my husband is 16 years old, my mother-in-law has been trying to get a citizenship for both her sons. But again, they are, the government, the state, they deny. And my mother-in-law currently, she is 62 2 years old, and she has been a teacher in a convent school. She used to be liked by all her colleagues and her students in her school. But at the age of 63 and after her retirement, because she feels so unsure and unsafe economically about her 2 sons, she was compelled to leave the country and work in Israel as a caregiver, you see. Which son would want their parent at this age to go somewhere, work as a caregiver? We have tried to convince her many times, but we cannot also force her, because that is her right as well. That is, at least, she feels she is contributing. She feels extremely guilty for not being able to provide citizenship to her 2 sons. That is also one thing that is affecting her very, very much. The next slide shows my brother-in-law's son. A little boy, Noah, his actual name is Noah Ivan Chetri, and he is 4.5 years old, and because he does not have birth registration so far, it is still very difficult, because the situation is such that the government rules and regulation is getting more strict these days, and they're asking for birth registration certificate even for the admission. So if this continues, and if this really gets strict, because he is in a play school right now, and next time when we try to admit him in a proper school, so it might be a problem for him to get admitted in any school at all. The next slide shows how and why actually this is all having this kind of effect on our family, or let's say the entire society. So what happens is, our country, our society is very much patriarchal society. We feel that the male bloodline is the most and only important thing. To raise a family, is responsible for the entire thing. So without a male bloodline, men's bloodline, they cannot sanction any legal or social identity to women at all. Recently, we have a new constitution in our country. So before we started, before the constitution, we had a huge discussion, mass discussion about how to draft this new constitution regarding citizenship issues, and there were a lot of discussions. A lot of international interest was there, trying to direct, how to come up with the best solution for this citizenship and all that. But then, by the time, because all this pull and push and everything else, and finally, when the citizenship, the constitution got promulgated, and when it came to our hands, if you just see it in one glance, it looks very nice and very, very positive. It looks that way. So this is what I'm trying to show. If you see that the first green box in there, it says any person whose father or mother was citizen of Nepal at the birth of such a person, that a person can be a citizen by descent. So this, I think, seems like to most of the people that it is the answer to everything else. There shouldn't be any stateless problem at all. And then the next second green box, it shows that every child found in whereabouts of Nepal, or whose paternity and maternity is not known, shall, until the mother or father is traced, be deemed as citizen of Nepal by descent. So that means that any people, any children who are found in the territory of Nepal, unclaimed by anyone else, just the children, and who cannot even identify who their parents are, then they are automatically accepted as citizens by descent. So these 2 lines sounds very, very good. The statelessness should not be there. The next slide shows the first box in a red box. This is where the problem starts. A person born to a Nepali citizen mother and having his or her domicile in Nepal, but whose father is not traced, shall be conferred the Nepali citizenship by descent, provided that in case his or her father is found to be foreigner, and the citizenship of such a person shall be converted to naturalized citizenship according to the federal law. Now, just being a woman, this is where the gender discrimination clearly shows. The same thing, if it is done by a male member of the society, this will not be applicable. But just because a woman, a Nepali woman, they try to get the citizenship through their mothers, then that would be a problem. Over here in this slide, in this box, it also says if the father is not traced, if the father is unidentified, this connotation also has a negative impact, because that also indicates a little bit towards women's character, women's moral character and all that in our family, in our society. So they also say, they all keep on saying that, you know, this particular line, this is what it really hurts me, because this gives this right to those officials or authorities to look for the father of the child. That's what is more important. Now, if you see the next one that is in a green box, it says like, if a foreign woman married to a Nepali citizen so wishes, may acquire nationalized citizenship of Nepal as provided for in a federal law. This looks so fine, you know, it's so nice. I mean, this is the most welcoming thing that I myself also felt for, because any foreigner lady is marrying to our Nepali men over here will get a citizenship without any problem at all. But the next line says a different story. Notwithstanding anything contained elsewhere in this article, in case of a person born to Nepali woman citizen married to a foreign citizen, she may acquire nationalized citizenship of Nepal as provided by the federal law. If she is having the permanent domicile in Nepal and she has not acquired citizenship of the foreign country. You know, this is the most discriminatory of all whatever is mentioned here in this constitution, I would say. Because now a woman is decided, you know, she has, like, you know, she has been retaining her citizenship, that will be, you know, in a very dire situation. That is, like, you know, if I say it in a very raw word, that would be deemed as a second-class citizen, because her citizenship, what she has already acquired, will also have a connotation, like, you know, depending on her marital status and her children. They also do not have that much of authority. Like, you know, if she marries a Nepali man, the child is going to be a Nepali. But if she marries a foreigner person, then the child will have to apply for the naturalized citizen. But then this also has impacted to all the single women whose husband is not traceable, or whose husband has given them a divorce or hard time or whatsoever. Or in any case, if a woman cannot produce a husband's document at all, which happened in my husband and husband's case, that the mother, like my mother-in-law, was not able to produce any documentation of her late husband. Even in that case, they are very rigid for not giving citizenship at all. Now, what they cite is cross-border marriage. Normally what happens is, like, you know, whenever we had discussion on the platform, whenever we demanded of this kind of rights to confer our citizenship to our children, we are always being pushed by saying that if citizenship is given through mothers, if this is allowed, then the entire nation, we have one big, huge nation with one of the maximum population in the world, China, and then the second largest country as India. So their thinking is that if you allow citizenship through mothers, all the women here in Nepal will be taken away by the men of these two countries. I know it is very ridiculous, but it doesn't mean that, like, you know, we Nepali women are waiting for any foreigners to, like, you know, people from across the border to come and marry us. It doesn't apply that. But at the same time, that's how they have been spreading xenophobia in the name of politics. And the politics, that is, those people who are very naive, they are very busy in their daily life, spreading such kind of xenophobia, spreading such kind of false fear to the people, is making it even more worse. Through this, they're also trying to impose that in case that such kind of thing happens, like, you know, people from India and China come here in Nepal and then start having their own, especially men, of course, and then have their children here in Nepal, then the bloodline of Nepali, the pure Nepali blood, you know, that will be demolished from the face of the earth. That's what the fear, you know, psychosis that they're working on. My conviction is that, you know, if Nepal truly feels that we do not have stateless problem at all, then Nepal should easily go and start signing this convention, where it is, like, you know, convention of the reduction of statelessness and convention relating to the status of stateless person. The reason I'm stressing onto this one is because every moment, every time that we hear, like, Nepal has signed so many treaties, the human rights treaties, CEDAW treaties, child rights treaties, and women's rights, and all that kind of thing. And it sounds so wonderful and nice, and okay, something was going to happen. Then when I dig a little bit into it, and I found out that Nepal has never agreed to sign the Convention on the Reduction of Stateless, there I could feel it, what the real intention is all about. So my concern is, has the effort by international community been able to convince Nepal's government or state to sign these conventions, which is so much important? Me being a family, a family member of a stateless family, here I feel like, today we are all facing all this problem because my country has not been true to people like us. And this is all because, they've been trying to act very dual personalities of sort of. They would go to the international community, they'll try to convince them and say, everything is well and good and we're doing everything fine. Whereas when they come back home, their language is not the same. So for that reason, to make them stick to their word, to make them stick to what it is really, So I think it is very, very important for us to pressure for this conventions. Citizenship in the Name of Mother is international community that they've been sending recommendations. As we all know that, when the country, a state party does not comply with the not complying party, the not complying state, is always sent recommendations to that state to how to improvise their law and order and all this kind of things. But it seems to me that it's been so many, I think 5 years or more than 5 years, the CEDAW committee has been sending so much of beautiful recommendation, if you can see that on the screen, But then what does our state party do? What does the state party do with all those recommendations in their hand? I don't see any response. I don't see any difference. I don't see anything at all that is happening with the people like that. We don't see any change. We don't feel anything at all. So for the reason is, if you really dig a little bit into it, if you see what is being stateless itself, is all because recommendations that CEDAW and UNHCR and all these parties has been sending to Nepal, they've just been overlooking to it, which is a big concern to me as well. And finally, after showing you the slide of CEDAW's recommendation, after the 5 years, this is what I received after my case was given verdict in Supreme Court just last year. Finally, I got a birth registration certificate for my 2 daughters. And if you can see our birth registration format up there, above is in Nepali, and then same thing is translated down below, which is birth registration certificate. And then in a red box, if you see, there's a Romanized words that has been written over there. It says Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko. So actually, this has been very cleverly put, because any foreign people would see the name of the person is Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko. Whereas in Nepali, Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko means a person who is unidentified. So that also means my children are daughters of Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko. So tomorrow you might find a lot of birth certificates and citizenship in case if they decide to issue with such kind of things, In Nepali society, the father unidentified also has, as I told you earlier, it also has negative connotation of stating that, a mother is, the character is very bad of that woman, and morally she is not fit in the society. She has been having so much of relationship with so many men that she cannot even identify who the father is. So it is giving a very different name and shame to a womanhood as a whole. But then as a foreigner, if you see the same registration, you'll feel like, oh, there's this gentleman named Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko in Nepal, and he has lots and lots of children. That's what I think you people will wrongly translate it to. So this is how through adding insults and humiliations through trickery, I mean to say is, we have been deceived in every steps. I would like to focus on this is that we are still victims. We are not yet survivors, and we are waiting for the day when we really start feeling the change, if there is any. My children, I cannot put a pause button in their life. Every minute, every second, they are growing. Once upon a time, they were a little kid who could fit on my lap, and now they are such big girls growing up to be beautiful ladies. Now this days, this time, this everything is passing by. I cannot stop their life at all. What is happening, the effort international community is putting, which is very, very commendable, of course. But at the same time, what I personally feel is we don't feel any change, any effect at all, because these children, they need the immediate relief, my daughters, they cannot go for higher studies at all. Tomorrow, if one of my family member, let's say my husband or my children or my brother-in-law or anybody else, falls sick, and then they need an immediate medical evacuation and they need to be airlifted, or they need to go somewhere else out of Nepal and get treated. We cannot do that because we don't have documentations. Similarly, if in case tomorrow we have some political threat to our family or to one of our member, and if we want to seek for asylum or refugee or asylum, that we cannot do at all, because again we do not have certain. So where is the human rights that we are all talking about? I think this is high time that we also at the same time need to not only the long-term solutions but also the short terms. What can be done to immediately bring positive effect to the victims, to the people from all over the world. And this is all. Thank you so much for giving me time and listening to my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deepti. That was wonderful. Very impacted by that. And I'm going to hand back to Catherine to pick up on that point of what can be done. So Catherine, if I hand over to you.
Great, thank you. And I think I want to keep this really brief so that we can have some time for Q&A and conversation with our other participants. But just to say that there are reform efforts going on all over the world in the countries that maintain these discriminatory nationality laws. In Nepal, actually, you see the picture in this slide is actually from one of the rallies in Nepal with that image of the citizenship in the name of mother that Deepti talked about. The global campaign is working with our national partners and regional organizations that are working on these issues, and they're, of course, as Deepti rightly highlighted, there are significant challenges in many places, but the good news is that there is a lot of momentum for reform in many countries. In the past decade alone, there's been over a dozen reforms in over a dozen countries, and we actually just had the first country since the launch of the global campaign, Madagascar, just in December. The Parliament passed a new nationality law that guarantees mothers' ability to equally confer their nationality on their children. And so we are hopeful that Nepal will not be too far behind, but obviously there are significant challenges. But in all of these target countries, there are robust movements for reform. Part of those efforts, I mean, what we've seen that has been really successful is when the stories of affected individuals, such as Deepti just so compellingly gave, when those stories can be brought front and center, when governments can really have a better understanding of what the real impact of these laws are, and linking national reform efforts with pressure at the international level. Because as Deepti rightly highlighted, while the international efforts through international human rights law, such as through the CEDAW committee's engagement, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, that does have a role, but it has to be complemented by movements for reform at the national level. And that does not always happen with the timeline that we want it to, but we do know, and we've had government representatives from countries that have reformed their laws in the recent past that have said that that combination of pressure at the international level through the international human rights treaty bodies combined with mobilization at the national level did encourage them to eventually take efforts to reform. I just got back a couple weeks ago from our national workshop in Togo, where we had 60 participants from a range of government ministries, parliamentarians, judges, civil society representatives, and a range of media from newspaper, radio, television. And that also is a very important strategy, is to engage the media, not just in things such as press conferences, but to train them as well, but so that they really have a better understanding of these issues. So I think that I know that we only have a few minutes left, but I think perhaps I'll just, you can see some of these pictures from our recent workshop. And this last picture, I guess I'll just end here, because this was really such a small victory coming from our workshop a couple weeks ago. After including a number of media representatives in our workshop with government representatives and civil society, the evening after our press conference, the woman sitting in the center is the host of this weekly show, and she brought on an affected person, a woman who's married to a foreigner, whose children don't have and husband don't have Togolese nationality, the director of the Nationality Directorate of Togo, and the president of our national partner, to talk about this issue and take call-ins from audience members across the country. They had an over an hour-long discussion, and so shining a light on this issue, while again the change isn't always as quickly as we want it to be, as more people understand the injustice that exists because of these discriminatory laws, we do see momentum for reform. And so I'll leave it there and would love to hear any questions and comments from the audience.
That was fantastic. Thank you again to both of our presenters. So we have a few questions, but I can encourage everyone who has additional questions to type those into the box right now. The first one is a question about the media. And the question is, as a journalist, I'd be curious to know what the most undercovered issues are as a part of this. So I don't know whether Catherine or Deepti, you can speak to some of the most undercover issues that a journalist could look to explore.
Well, I think it really depends on the country, whether or not it's the national media or covering this from kind of an international perspective. I think that one of the areas that we're really looking can get more and more emphasized, and that I think when governments hear this, their ears perk up a little bit more, and that is the implications for countries' development, the ways in which this actually inhibits countries, it prevents citizens from contributing to their country's developments, and the linkages with the Sustainable Development Goals. There really hasn't been, to my knowledge, a piece yet that has really looked at the links with the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, if there's any interest in covering that, I'd be more than happy to go through that in more detail. The Global Campaign is actually in the process of creating a short advocacy guide. It'll just be like a 2-pager that provides a quick summary of each of the Sustainable Development Goals that are impacted. Because while you have the structural goals such as eliminating discrimination against women, and there's a clear link here, when you look at all those different, whether it's access to education, formal employment, housing. One of the things that we didn't talk about here is that the inability to pass family property to children and spouses. And I know Deepti is well aware of this. Another woman who's been active in Nepal on this issue as well, I had a conversation with her a few months back, and she said to me, I'm afraid all the time. She said, if anything happens to me, my children and my husband can't acquire our family house. They can't have our land. So anyway, maybe Deepti has some more thoughts on that.
Catherine, thank you so much. Well, yes, that's true. Limitations that we face every day is limitless. It is like, that is one thing that we've gotten for free, I think. That every step that we take, we always face challenges such as property right, bank account, and not even a scooter. My husband, he rides a scooter up to his school to commute to his office every day. But he always has to run away or hide from the police because he's an excellent scooter rider. He never drinks and drives. He does everything else as a good citizen must do in this country. But then he has to run looking at the police in a distance and run as a fugitive all the time. It doesn't feel good at all.
Just one more thing quickly that I'd say is that I come across, and I mean, if the issue wasn't so serious and tragic, really, and unjust, it would almost be comical that in almost every country that we go to, those that are opposed to reform, the government, there's always a quote unquote unique situation that that country is facing. They have a special, unique reason why in that country alone they can't change the law because of X, Y, and Z. In Nepal, it's because Indian men will take over the country. It's literally something that's been said. And I think if a piece looked at the fact that these arguments are actually kind of universal across the board in target countries, and that these justifications are actually not unique at all.
That touches on one of the other questions, and maybe I could just give you that, which is to talk through some of the reasons by those who are opposing reforms in nationality laws, and kind of what can be done to overcome those oppositions.
Well, one of the issues is quote unquote security / political, like I mentioned with the case of Nepal. And really, without getting overly, I guess, gender and academic on International Women's Day, but they really get to the heart of kind of patriarchal mindsets and women's unequal status in society, because this idea that letting in foreign men, that the children of foreign men and national women will obviously more embrace the identity and the national allegiance to the father's country, which of course isn't the case. That economic concerns, and that kind of cuts both ways, where you're talking about countries that are developing countries and that are struggling a bit more economically in terms of thinking that there are scarce resources to go around, and that a lot of these arguments are very similar, if not the same, as arguments and debates that are had around immigration more broadly and expanding access in the country to people from other places. Now, the irony, of course, is that when you're talking about the wives and the children of male nationals married to have children with foreigners, these questions aren't even brought up at all. And then again, in some of richer countries, let's say in some of the Gulf countries, where citizenship comes with a hefty amount of support and money from the government, again, it's this, well, do we want to be expanding our resources? And then again, with security, this idea that opening up citizenship to foreign men, allowing them, to come into the country and to have the equal access to nationality that the foreign women married to national men would have, is perceived as undesirable and threatening. When the irony is, we know that what these laws actually do is, by forcing people to be in the informal sector, to be undocumented, that actually both security and economic development benefit from the inclusion of women citizens' families in this essential social contract of citizenship. That this is actually, the government arguments can really be flipped on their head. If you're interested in more of this, I can share with the organizers. I know they're going to be sending up a follow-up email, but I have an essay that was written for a recent publication called The World's Stateless Children that our steering committee member of the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion just published. And in that, I give an outline of some of the arguments that are used by those that are opposed to reform, and some of the successful strategies that have been used by organizations around the world to advocate for reform.
Did you have anything to add from the Nepali experience of what excuses or arguments are being used? Or another question that we have had is around long-term and short-term goals. And the question is, international organizations working for statelessness have both long-term and short-term goals, but shouldn't they focus more on short-term goals, providing immediate relief to affected persons before focusing on the long-term goals? So if you want to speak to the last question or to that second question, that'd be great to hear.
I think the best would be, I'd like to add a little bit more what Catherine just said a while ago. The excuses are be it from the male bloodline point of view or the security point of view or anything as such. At the core, it definitely is that ruling mentality of a male psychology. That's what it is actually. They do not want to leave that little bit even. That's the entire thing. Because, you see, last time when we were putting up this protest, they were citing it to the security of the national security, and etc., etc., etc. Now the new protest has emerged in the street, and then, like, in the media at the moment, that the demand is for citizenship, like the people who are bearing naturalized citizens, who are actually, in our Nepal's context, like majority of the Indian gentleman who has taken citizenship of Nepal as a naturalized citizen. Now their demand is they want to be a head of state, So this citizenship through mothers and then the gender thing, this is getting slowly sidelined, you see, because just a handful of people, handful of politicians, or who, like, God knows who, they wish that the naturalized citizen should be the head of state, and that is what is the most important thing at all, if any. So that is, when we come to the logic, every year, every moment, they will keep on, like, like, for example, like if you see our constitution a while ago, what I showed you, there it is mentioned that, if the father is unidentified, then the child can take a citizenship by descent. But now, like, the new bill is being worked on, and then the discussions are going on that says, like, that is only meant for the child through rape cases. And there's this community called Badi, where they don't have father, and that's the entire community there, like entertainers community in the villages, a very rural village. What they are arguing is, now this line that is mentioned in our constitution is only applied for that community and for the child born through rape. So they're arguing that that cannot be applicable to people like us or my children. So that's also another thing that I wanted to add up with.
Thank you. And Catherine, I don't know whether a quick 30 seconds on long-term versus short-term goals. Where should the focus be right now for advocates in the field?
Well, I would say it does depend on the country and what the realistic chances are for substantial reforms in the near future. I will say that in terms of the economic and social rights that are impacted by these laws, governments actually have a responsibility to be providing these rights, regardless of whether or not individuals are stateless. So at a start, they're already in violation of their responsibilities to ensure that individuals within their territory, children, for example, have access to education, to healthcare. So first and foremost, I think that whether it's national activists or international organizations need to constantly be reminding governments that regardless of the status of individuals, their stateless status, they have a responsibility to uphold their economic and social rights. But this gets to the crux of the challenge with human rights work, is that, we at the end of the day, we can't force governments to do these things. One model in terms of temporary relief, and I should also say, when we're engaging in advocacy, and including with advocacy with international human rights bodies in Geneva, such as CEDAW and the Committee on the Rights of the Child, included in our recommendations for country reviews is that in the meantime, while needed reforms are pending in terms of reforms for the nationality law, we encourage governments to take temporary measures to ensure that all those affected individuals, that their rights are upheld. Jordan, for example, has enacted policies to provide for educational, healthcare, and professional opportunities for the children of Jordanian women who are not permitted to get access to nationality themselves. The challenge here, again, is that even when sometimes these temporary measures are put into place, they are not often implemented to the degree that we would like to see them. And we see that in Jordan as well, that there's some implementation, but it's not across the board. So I definitely agree with Deepti that temporary measures need to be taken and governments need to be constantly reminded of these obligations. But I think that, at the same time, we have to be pushing for the legal reform and the implementation of these legal reforms, because you do have, situations like Madagascar where rather than getting the government to do a temporary measure, they reform the law. Now, that, again, depends on the country that you're working in, whether or not you see that as being realistic reform that's going to happen in the near term.
That was great. I'm just going to give a final minute to anyone who is who's been listening to the presentation to add any contributions that they might like to make. So if there's anyone who wants to react, please raise your hand and state your name and organization, and then make your interventions. But really try and keep these to just a minute, if possible. Mustafa has raised his hand. Mustafa, do you want to come in then?
Basically, from my observation is that the biggest problem is one, culture. The culture might also determine the laws that we have, especially if you have countries where the women's rights are very oppressed. Nepal side is it's one of the cases that we can't even speak about in terms of women's rights, in terms of culture. For example, even the menses, and it's simple. In Kenya also, we are, before the 2010 constitution, we had a challenge whereby the man was the only person who was giving nationality to the child. But after the 2010 constitution, now the woman can give nationality to the child. But the biggest challenge is that the people who are implementing the laws on the ground still have the old laws in their brains. So we still have to brainwash them and program them again. So the problem also comes in terms of goodwill from the officers on the ground, because sometimes if you say that you're a single parent, they might even ask you for other documents, like an affidavit that you're a single parent. You don't need to produce it, you just need an ID of your parent. So anyway, it's not that bad in Kenya, but we still have the problem of the goodwill from the registrars. And then when Stacey, you're saying about, when the presenter was talking about the state's also obligation, I think the problem also is in the international law. For example, if you look at the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 7 says that the child has the right to nationality, but it does not categorically mention that the child has the right to nationality of that country that he was born. So the state can always say that, yes, you have a right to nationality, but to the nationality of the country of origin. So it's all of this also comes into the issue of political goodwill. I'm saying that the problem with the law, both national and also internationally. So I think one of the things that we can look at as organizations working with these, within these countries, can we have like coalitions that can advocate for change? For example, in Kenya, we have a concise network where I can see some of the participants also come from the network, from the civil society, UNHCR, and other NGOs in the country. So if we could have a bigger network that can advocate for these changes, it will be better, because, for example, last year when the Makonde is one of the communities that was stateless in Kenya. After the civil society started speaking and highlighting the issue in the help of UNHCR, the community was registered. So I believe with stronger civil society movements and also using the people who are the victims to speak about this. I love the way that we had one of the speakers who's a first-hand victim. It also strikes emotions within people. So I love the presentation. And one last word that I would like to say is that
sorry, Mustafa, I'm gonna use my time. Sure, we have one other person, and I know we're desperately over time. So I just want to give a minute to Munna, who's asked to speak.
Hi, I know you all are talking at the advocacy and at the government reforming, changing level, but I'm talking from, India and Nepal are very patriarchal in their nature. So one reason why they refuse to change these forms in Nepal is because they indirectly force the women to, move to the country of the man, or in India, a place like India, where we don't have these restrictions, but still I'm single and I'm 54, and till date I have been asked this question, what is your husband? Oh, you don't have a husband, why? So these are the questions. Indirectly they put pressure, for you to either move to the country where the man belongs, or force her to sorry, my question also was when Deepti said that, her children were born, and Noah Chetri, when he was born, the registration became compulsory. So how does the registration at the hospital takes place? What do they write in the birth certificate?
Yes, that's right. In hospital paper, that yes, the child is born from so and so father and so mother. But then with that paper, you have to go to the ward office and register the child's birth certificate. The problem is that when you go for that, you have to bring your father's citizenship card along with you. Then only they are going to register the child's birth. So without which, the child's certificate, like birth registration, is not done at all. That
So
is
your
how it is.
father's mother moved from some other country to Nepal?
No, my father
Sorry,
and forefather,
your
they were
mother-in-law.
always here. No, my mother-in-law has always been Nepali, and her forefathers were always Nepali. But then, my mother-in-law, like my father-in-law, let's say biological father-in-law, because he committed, he died when the children were very, very young.
Small.
And then she wanted to move away from all the tragic family tragedies and all that. So she wanted to carry on with her life. She was young herself, so she got remarried with another gentleman. So once you're married to another family, another gentleman, and you have already a set of life, you don't want to again peek through your past and dig into what it is.
Yeah.
And she went on along like that way, but then at the time of citizenship for her sons, that's what the problem came up.
Okay, and now my question to Catherine is, Catherine, when we do these reforms, I have also worked a little bit because I have been, I'm talking at the corporate level. If the mindset of the people doesn't change, these reforms don't come, because we always had laws of equality, even in India, but it doesn't work because the mindset doesn't change.
I think you brought up, implementation is a massive challenge, and something that, we've seen in some countries that have enacted reforms where the implementation has been quite good, and there are many countries where the implementation has been quite a challenge. And so some of the things that we talk about when talking with government representatives about and civil society partners in terms of the reform process is that it's absolutely critical that embedded in these reforms is a clear plan, and that includes resources to train government civil authorities, not just at the higher levels, but to ensure that the local level civil authorities are trained, and that that the policies do not leave room for discretion at the local level, where discriminatory beliefs can then inhibit access to rights. And broader questions in terms of governance, there need to be policies in place that provide for punishment for when authorities aren't applying the law as they're written. But in terms of the application of new nationality laws, training local authorities, because many times in countries that have reformed the laws, you'd even find at the local level that those that are supposed to be implementing the new law aren't even aware that the reforms took place. So having a really robust training program, and then importantly, ensuring that there is a public awareness raising campaign so that affected individuals, which oftentimes are living at the margins in some countries, that there's a strong campaign to ensure that affected families know that these reforms take place, that they can go back and try to get the documents that they are deserved, and that civil society organizations operating in the country have the information to be able to demand that local authorities uphold the reforms that have taken place. But I fully appreciate what you've said about implementation and the mindset of authorities that need to be implementing these new laws, and that's obviously a massive challenge. But I think that gets to one point that I think is really important about this issue of discriminatory nationality laws, is that these laws get to the heart of questions about gender equality and discrimination against women. And so what we've seen in countries across the globe when these reform campaigns have taken place, that they've had a spillover effect impacting national conversations about gender equality and women's status in society more broadly. So while culture change is a very long process, we do know that we have to start with the laws. If you don't have equality in the law, you're at a massive loss. You can't demand your rights. And even if we recognize that the application and the culture change does take time, having equality in the law and then impacting these national conversations about gender norms and about equality, it does have a positive impact, I believe, on the long-term efforts to achieve gender equality, not as quickly as we would like.
Great. And Mona, I would encourage you to also look at Namati's own citizenship program. We use community paralegals to really help with the implementation of laws and policies. So there's some really interesting examples of our work there, and I would speak more of it, but we are grossly over time. So I'm going to wrap up now and thank everyone for joining. If you have enjoyed today, we've got 2 more webinars in March, the following 2 Wednesdays, which will focus on the SDGs, but also really tackle that question around implementation. How can we start to move some of these reforms and use other international processes or national processes? So I'm just going to say thank you again to Ashley and Tobias from the network team who've been fielding questions for you all. And a huge thank you to Catherine and to Deepti who've joined. It's been incredible to hear your experience. I'm feeling very riled up myself, and on this International Women's Day, even more dedicated to fighting for the citizen rights of women. So I would like to thank you both for inspiring me and all of the other people who have been on this call. So yeah, as I said at the start, this has been put on by the Global Legal Empowerment Network. So thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Deepti. Thank you, Catherine. And goodbye. If you guys want to say a final farewell, that would be lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you, Catherine. Thank you all the participants for giving me this, platform. And again, like from us, from the family of Stateless, I would wish you all a very, very happy Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, Namati, for organizing this, and thank you for all the participants for engaging in this discussion with us. And Deepti, thank you so much for all of your tireless efforts. You continue to inspire all of the work that we do, and we'll keep fighting. And happy International Women's Day to everybody. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks so much. Hopefully we'll see you next week.